All right, good afternoon, Sheikh Pachwai. My name is Asa Washines. I am the tribal liaison at the Attorney General's office. I've been here about 3 years now. And I brought another coworker with me. Her name is Lucy Smartlowit, and I'll let her introduce herself real quick.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lucy Smartlowit. I am also Yakima and Mexican. I just started at the AGO office last Monday, and I am the newly appointed MMIWP Task Force Policy Analyst.
Yeah, and so at some point she will be giving these presentations, and not me, because I think she'll do a better job. Okay, so I appreciate the invite today from Michelle and the Office of Equity. This is important work that's been ongoing. There's some accounts that this work was first recorded back in 1855 at the Yakima Nation. There was a young Yakima woman and her children were murdered by settlers, and the murder was reported to the regional BIA, regional superintendent at the time, and which what prompted the Yakima War of 1855. And so, Indian people are strange to the issue. It's been ongoing since then. Working with the Attendant Attorney's office and our community and our partners, we're trying to face the issues head on. And so this is the work of grassroots organizing. This is the work of our tribal communities coming together and kind of organizing ourselves, within the governmental structure. And so it's fairly new concept of bringing grassroots into government and getting results. So yeah. Okay, so we'll just jump right into it, So the first thing, next slide, please, is that our task force is really grounded in our families and survivors. They're the ones that are here on the front lines when it comes to this issue. They're the ones that are surviving. They're the ones that are witnesses, firsthand accounts of what's going on when it comes to missing, murdered Indigenous women and people. And so because of them, that's our foundation of who we are as a task force. Everything we do is founded on our families and survivors. And so that's how we honor them in doing this work. And so it's really great to see that a statewide task force can be centered on families, community, and survivors. And so that's really important to get that concept, to understand that concept. Next slide. So, when it comes to missing, murder, Indigenous women, people, MMIW, there's things that we know, and there's things that we don't know. What we do know is that there's a disproportionate rates of violence when it comes to our community. Intersections with other social problems, talk about opioids, fentanyl, Indian Child Welfare Act, all these interact. We know that there's incomplete data when it comes to data collection, and then going through the data of who has been, who's a victim, who's not a victim, and how they're identified. And it wasn't for grassroots, we wouldn't have a task force right now. And there's so much that goes on within this area. There's not a whole lot of media coverage that goes along with this issue. We have barriers to access. Some families, communities don't know what's going on. But then, we have community responsibility, because some of these are historical policies that have been implemented by government. And so it's the community responsibility to try to help solve it and fix it and address it. So next slide, please. So again, this work isn't new, But the first probably comprehensive report that we got was from United Indian Health Institute, UIHI. They did a great report, but it's a good report, and it started with data from 71 cities. And so when we talk about Indian country, we talk about tribes, tribal communities. We know because of historical federal policies of removal and genocide that not all tribal people live on reservations. Seattle, King County, Pierce County, Spokane, Vancouver, Yakima have large populations of tribal members living there that live off reservation. And so UIHI, their report was first of its kind to kind of identify some of these issues on MMIW. It provided a baseline study for everything. It really raised awareness on the issue. And it got the attention of legislatures, both state and federal. So it was really good. Next slide, please. And so the task force, well, what is the role of the task force? And so there's a couple of things that outlined from the legislature to create a task force. There's a lot of things of data that we need to go through, a lot of research and study that the task force needs to do. We need to analyze and look at the jurisdictional issues that rise up between tribe, state, and federal, and even surrounding states. We need to access data tracking and reporting practices or lack of. And so it's a long list of work that needs to happen on this task force. And so we do have a dedicated webpage at the AGO. If you go to the AGO website and look up MMIW task force, we have all these resources available at our webpage. And probably the biggest things of the task force is providing recommendations and best practices moving forward. And so it's been on 18 months since we first implemented the task force, and we've done a lot of work in a short amount of time. And so we'll get into that shortly. Next slide, please. So what do we know now? I'll say this, that family members and survivors are the experts. They're the ones that have gone through it. They're the ones that witnessed it firsthand. And so because we identify them as the experts, the task force, we're centered on their needs and their experiences. And so that's pretty unique. We need continuous engagement and transparency when working with our community and this task force. I know historically speaking, for communities, especially tribal communities and tribes, to trust the government. And so now in this instance, we have a task force that is a part of the government. So we need to work even harder to gain that trust from community for this government task force. And so that's continuous transparency and continued engagement. We also recognize the need, that difference between tribes and urban communities. That's one thing that we're always trying to figure out, always trying to balance out. Tribes that, we got 29 federally recognized tribes in Washington, and each, have the right to self-determination, right to tribal sovereignty. And so we recognize that. Also, at the same time, not all tribal members from these tribes live on reservations. So how do we support our urban relatives? And so that's something else that we're working on. Again, racial misclassification is huge when it comes to identifying as tribal folks. And so that's something that we need to address, that we're still addressing. There's family members out there that are going through these issues. They don't know that there's resources available to them. And we need to find out how come that this need is not being met when it's available. And so is it better advertising? Is it better outreach, communication? And so that's something that we're trying to figure out. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so we have more findings. And so this is from our first 18 months on the ground. Some families that came to us reported law enforcement might refuse to take missing person reports when a loved one goes missing. And so that should not be happening. If you have a relative that goes missing, you should report that immediately. There's you don't need to wait 24 hours. There's no waiting period. If you feel someone is missing, you need to take that to law enforcement, and law enforcement needs to make a report about it. And so we're getting stories from families, from community that's not happening. We need to improve cross-jurisdictional collaborations. Oftentimes tribes and the unique tribal status when it comes to reservation land. On the reservation, there's land on the reservation that are checkerboarded, and so we need to work with the county sheriffs. We need to work with the local law enforcement, city, municipal, to make sure that a response. There is a response when there is a case being filed, that there's someone there to take that report, and so that's happening. We're also recognizing that tribal court orders are not being fulfilled, that they're not being recognized. And so tribes are sovereign. They have the sovereignty to have their own court system, the criminal justice system within tribes. It's there. It's different across every tribe, but it's still there. And it needs to be recognized by other municipals. It needs to be recognized by counties and state, and so that's something that's trying to be addressed right now. We know not just tribal law enforcement, but all tribal law enforcement, there's a lack of personnel. There's a lack of resources. And so we as a task force, we're trying to address that through our various relations that we have with law enforcement. And so there's some basic needs that need to be met, and maybe looking to our federal partners for some of those resources. We need to build that. And at the end, probably the most important, tribal data sovereignty. That's pretty huge when it comes to the tribes and their data. And so we want to make sure that when tribes want their data, when it comes to MMIWP, that they have it, it's theirs. And we try to collect practices that are helpful to tribes as well. And so we want to be partners with tribes in all aspects, and data collection is part of that. Okay, next slide. And so those initial recommendations, those initial findings kind of came from our subcommittees. We have 5 subcommittees. They have different functions. Our task force is comprised of 22 different individuals, and the makeup is kind of spread across the state. We got 5 tribes that have been identified to be part of our task force. We have 4 urban Indian organizations that are part of the task force, and then as well as, we got state representatives, state senators, we got state agencies, different state work groups. We got prosecutors, public defenders, counties and cities all involved in this. So it truly is a statewide task force. And so from there, we broke it up into different subcommittees. And this is where all the work gets done. Probably our most busy subcommittees are criminal justice and public safety. And right now we have our prosecutor from the city of Seattle, Albany Burns. She's a co-chair, and she's co-chair with Chief Sam White of Lower Alwa. He's the tribal police chief down there. And so he's also on WASPIC. Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs. And so these two, as co-chairs, really have conversations with law enforcement, people who work in criminal justice, the criminal justice system. And so we get a lot of good conversations going on in that subcommittee, and they come up with strong recommendations. Our next subcommittee is our community services and resources. What's out there? What's available for families? Is it based by region? Is it based by county? And so trying to figure out what's what and what's available. And how come it's not available? What if we have good resources in King County, but that's not available in Spokane County? And so how can we address those needs? And so trying to identify, kind of index everything that we have that's available and what's not available. And we talk about what services they provide. And so we're learning from each other and trying to uplift each other when it comes to community service and resources. Tribes, this is our probably most unique subcommittee because it's for tribal leaders. And because tribes have the federal trust responsibility to the federal government, the state task force could recommend federal recommendations. And so we have a great conversation with tribal leaders and making those federal recommendations. Anytime we have recommendations, we have consultation with tribes on them. And so that's something that we'll be doing as well. Next slide. Some more of our committees, the data and research. This is our kind of meat and potatoes of our task force. They're the ones that are writing the report, reviewing data, analyzing data. We did our first report that came from our office last year. We're working on our second report right now, and that hopes to be done by end of the year. And then we'll have a final report next year. And so this is probably our main subcommittee that's doing a lot of the work when it comes to the report. And then our family subcommittee, again, we're centered on them. They're the ones that are the experts when it comes to this issue. And so we have good conversations and with our families, with our community members. And these meetings are public. Anyone can attend any of our subcommittees. Anyone is welcome to make comments. And so we're doing a lot of good work in our family subcommittee right now. And then kind of help leading us, our ragtag group is our executive committee. It's a 5-person co-chair executive committee. It's kind of nice. We don't have one chair, we have 5 co-chairs. And so we have Representative Lakanoff. She's a state representative. She's one of the co-chairs. We got Councilwoman Bean from Puyallup. She's on there. Abigail Echohawk. She's going to help do that initial report. Chief Sam White from Lowell, Iowa. He's on WASPEC as well. And then we have our representative from our AGO, which is now Lucy. So she'll be on the executive committee as well. And so it's a really good group of leaders that we have. Next slide. So how are we making change? And so one of the first things that we recommended was have a bill. So back in 2022, we made a recommendation to the legislature that we need a missing Indigenous peoples alert bill. And it was passed, and this is really great. And so it would take a day and a half to get an alert out. So when you think about the alerts you see on a highway, there's a silver alert, amber alert. When elder go missing or someone, these alerts are very helpful. And so prior to that, it would take about a day and a half, almost 2 days to get notice out to those highway signs. Now it takes about 10 minutes. And so as of October 1st, we've had 71 alerts go out. I know those 71, 5 have not been found. And we're still looking for them, but we found 2 deceased. But I mean, not to, like, there's closure for the family when we did find the two deceased. And so so this alert is life-changing. We're finding people, which is amazing. And it doesn't take a lot of time. California is trying to do something similar. I know Oregon wants to do something similar. Last week, we had a conversation with folks from Canada. And so, and then we're inviting folks from Alaska. And so this alert is moving forward, is gaining momentum. We will, moving forward, we want to have a national alert. And so that's something that we can look forward to on a national level, working with our congressional delegation, Senator Cantwell, Senator Murray. That's something that this issue is something they're committed to as well. And so once we get to that point, we'll be advocating for a national NEPA alert. Next slide. So what else is going on? So, we did a report. It's an amazing report. Annie Enforcement Adams helped this report tremendously. This is some artwork from one of our community members who helped with the front page here. This is on our web page, our website. Please review it, read it, check it out. It's a really great initial report that we did. Next slide. And then also last December, we held a summit. MMIWP Summit is our inaugural summit. It's hosted by PEAR. We had about 100 people show up. And we're still trying to get the word out. We're still trying to get folks to come out. But it was a really great summit. We had a great conversations in Puyallup. And so we talked about the issues. We had some keynote speakers. And so we're moving things. We're moving things forward on behalf of the issue. And so next, also this past year, one of the recommendations was to create a cold case unit. And these cold case unit would, who's been identified as long-term missing persons, unidentified remains, and unresolved homicides. This cold case unit will investigate it. And so this was passed last year by the House of Representatives, signed into law. Governor Inslee has signed it already. We're in the process of hiring a supervisor. We're going to hire a team to help them of probably retired investigators. And we're going to have a family navigator to help kind of like go between the investigators, law enforcement, and the family and community. And so we're going to hire someone to help facilitate those discussions. And so right now we identified about 100 cold cases in Washington State that could be reviewed. Our office is already receiving requests from this cold case unit to help them. And so we hope to get this moving within the next couple months, being fully staffed, and start reviewing cases. And so this was a major win. And this one was first, like the MIPA bill, the missing persons bill, this cold case, both are first in the nation of doing this work. Next slide. And we created a missing persons toolkit. This is something our office did some time ago. It hasn't been updated since 2003, I believe. And so we wanted to create an updated toolkit. So what happens when a relative goes missing? What happens when like you don't know what to do? You kind of figure out what's what. And so our family subcommittee, they're putting together this toolkit. We got support from the legislature to hire staff people to help develop this toolkit. And so we're in the early stages of a first draft of what that toolkit looks like. And so that'll be a great resource for all Washingtonians, not just tribal people, but every person, every family in Washington is going to benefit from this legislation. Next slide. So looking forward, there's a lot that we want to do. We're pretty we set the standard high for ourselves, and so good or bad, you know, we want to be that standard for Indian country, based on our initial 18 months. And so we will continue to uplift families and communities. And then right now we're in our data and research phase. We're doing a deep dive into some of these databases out there in Washington State and how data is collected, how data is misidentified. And so we're doing that. We're working with our criminal justice system, our public safety folks on recommendations. We want to work more with our federal partners, the BIA, the FBI, U.S. Attorney's Office. So we're doing that. Right now, you guys are invited to the next MMIP second annual summit at Northern Quest Casino, November 1st and 2nd. And so that'll be taking place next week. We have a really good agenda. The tribal co-host, we put together a great 2-day agenda. And we're working with tribes in Idaho. So this is more of a regional approach to the work as opposed to being siloed as Washington State, but now we're reaching out to Idaho and Idaho tribes. And then we're in the final steps of our 2023 report. And so we hope to get that done by December, if not sooner. But that's what's going on in the role of MMIWP in Washington State. I know that's a lot of information. I'm glad Lucy's here to start helping out and start, doing some of this work. But that's our presentation. There's a lot more work that needs to be done though. So. Do anyone want to do questions or how you want to do this, Michelle?
Well, first of all, thank you. And I know I say this every time we collaborate on this, but I personally want to lift up folks who do this kind of heavy work. I don't know how you guys do this, and I am just awestruck by it every time that, because this is the second or third time we've gone through this presentation together. So thank you. And Lucy, is the first time we've met, but thank you too. Very important work, and I would be lying if I said it wasn't something that has struck close to my family as well. So I appreciate you not just as colleagues, as in the state enterprise, but on a personal level. So thank you again. I actually can't see the participant list right now, but when we started, I absolutely shared with the rest of our co-hosts here that if there are any questions, to just pop your hand up. And Asa, and I'm just going to put you in the mix too, Lucy, are happy to answer those. But when we were kind of dreaming up this session, what we were hoping people would be able to take away is an understanding of what is the MMIWP movement. Why is it necessary, which is a bit of that heavy story. And then what we, the state, are doing about it, which you covered very clearly. And then a question that we've come across in a few other states, in a few other places where we've had this conversation, Asa, is what can people do to help? And the reason that question has come up is that it feels like such a big problem. And as an individual, you feel like such a tiny person, that what can one person do to make a difference in this space?
Yeah, and all those, this started from just ordinary people, people in the community, people who, wanted to advocate, so it's just, you don't need to be like a policy expert to do this work, right? For starters, just read the report that was produced, not just from our office, but from UIHI. That one looks at urban Indians. And so our report is more focused on statewide. And so just really take the time to read that report. It's pretty good, comprehensive initial report for Washington State. And as we move forward, we'll come out with more recommendations, which are much broader. And so in the initial report, there's only 10 recommendations from the task force. But you'll see we had over 100 recommendations from our subcommittee that we couldn't get to in time to review, to analyze, to conduct research. And so we're going to have more recommendations moving forward. But just reading the initial report goes a long way. Lucy, you want to add anything to that?
I agree about reading the report. And then there's also a lot of great podcasts out there that people could, find on Spotify. Connie Walker does a great job of working on highlighting First Nations. And she doesn't just go into MMIW, but she also goes into boarding school experiences as well. I think right now, because we're getting some traction, there are like other types of documentaries available. YouTube is a great resource. I think just Googling missing and murdered Indigenous people is a great start. And actually, I mean, by everybody being here to hear about this is a great start. As far as like the movement piece goes, like Asa had said, it comes from family, people who probably didn't feel like they had a voice, didn't know where they had to turn to, but knew it was an injustice, and that too many people in our community were experiencing those injustices, and something needed to get done. And truthfully, in my opinion, it's been long overdue. And so I think this is a really great way for Washington State to set the precedence, for the work that we're doing in general across the MMIW stuff. So, yeah.
And there's two like random facts that people just need to know. Again, if a relative goes missing, you don't need to wait 24 hours. You can immediately call law enforcement, call 911, and then get a report filed. And then the Washington State Patrol, they have a missing persons unit. And so they can help facilitate discussions and resources of who to connect, who to talk to. Specifically, if they're a tribal person, the Washington State Patrol has 2 tribal liaisons that can help facilitate discussion. And so the State Patrol has a great resource. They have a unit there. And so missing people affects everyone, one of us. And so calling the State Patrol is probably a good resource as well.
Hi, this is the moderator, Sabrina. So I just want to go ahead and go over some questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. So the first question says, what do you recommend someone do when police refuse to take a report or document that they were called or notified of a missing person?
Okay. And that's a tough question. And it has come up a lot within our office. And so again, I'd recommend, first of all, kind of make your own paper trail, your own documentation, get your own notebook out, like take your own notes on everything that you're doing and your interaction with law enforcement. Second, would call the State Patrol. Like their missing persons unit will help. They'll help facilitate discussions. And in some instances, when that doesn't work, usually the family works with the State Patrol and the tribal liaisons. Our office can get involved and we can make phone calls to local law enforcement and ask questions why things weren't done. And so kind of like in those 3 different tiers, and that's what we would, we've done that in the past.
This is the moderator again. The second and third question, I think the second question was answered. It says, is there anything we can do to help? And then the second one, or excuse me, the third one says, do you have a preliminary list or ideas for the toolkit?
Oh, yeah, the toolkit. And so the family subcommittee is they're working on that one right now. And it's based on their experiences. And so literally, like, what is the first thing that you need to do when you have a relative that goes missing? And they go through step by step, and they're pretty detailed on what needs to be done. And so they taught me a lot of the things about the process. And so that's still coming out. We're still in draft form. You know, we want to make a comprehensive guide, and we also want to make a quick guide for reference. And so that's still being developed. And then something that needs to be done, we talked about collectively, is prevention, doing an awareness campaign. And so that's something that we'll all be doing, but that's on the list of things to do. On the prevention side, awareness raising, we'll probably do an awareness campaign soon, and get more media involved. But yeah.
This is the moderator. Another question says, what can we do to help or volunteer?
You know, we have a lot of grassroots organizations throughout the state that do a lot of this work. We got some grassroots organizations that go out and like actually do searches within the city, and they're really successful. They know what they're doing. They're recognized by the community they live in. Some do more of a social media campaign. There's people that kind of reshare missing persons flyers. There's people that go out and try to identify people online. And so there's different organizations with different functions. And so, you know, I think that's something that we need to provide. Lucy, is a website for people to go to help if they want to volunteer, you know, if they want to spend some extra time doing a community search. And so there's people out there, there's organizations that could use volunteer help. We know them, we still got them listed. And so they're just, I'll just look, you go on Facebook and just do a MMIWP Facebook group search. You know, there's ones in Seattle, Spokane. They're active. And so if you look for them online, they're active.
Last question. This is the moderator. Is there any other websites or information that you can provide for people to get engaged with?
Yeah, there's there's a national task force that's going on with the Department of Interior. Secretary Holland and the Department of Interior is doing her a federal MMIWP commission, and so they have federal recommendations, and there's a lot of resources that came from the previous administration for your community, and so just again, Google federal MMIWP task force, and those will come up. I mean, there's even, I'm sure other states have done this work too. Our office, when we first started the task force, our office called Minnesota, New Mexico, Arizona, states that previously had task force. And so we looked up their states, things that they did, resources they shared, and we kind of took their best practices and we took their challenges and we incorporated into our task force. And so looking at other states and what they're doing, it goes a long way. You know, doing your own research on that kind of helps.
I want to add to the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center also has some really great information around MMIWP. There's also a national hotline now that's ran by an Indigenous organization. And so that's exciting. So there's different ways that you can help and volunteer too, aside from doing some of the research. You know, you could do donations towards some of these organizations. You could also, you know, like Asa had mentioned before, there's community events, but I would also encourage you guys to be mindful because there is, we're a vulnerable population. And so when you're thinking about working with families or wanting to support them, you want to be able to make sure you do it in a good way. And because sometimes, you know, these families are coming from a place of hurt. And so I think just being mindful of that and, you know, determining what you feel comfortable with as well, as far as like your engagement goes. Because, you know, in the long run, the families are providing these recommendations around how, you know, newspapers write about them, or how other people come, you know, community members that don't know and now know and want to engage and feel like they have to do something, you know, those are all best practices that we're still trying to identify and sort out for ourselves. But I think trusting your intuition in those spaces also, and then again, just, you know, thinking about where these families are at, you know, in the long run. So NIWRC is a great resource. There's also other domestic violence, interpersonal violence hotlines and other types of research, because it doesn't just stick to MMIWP. You know, there's other intersections that contribute to how we get to talking about these topics, right? So prevention can also be in working with domestic violent programs, or those that are trying to prevent it or treat it. So yeah, that's all I have to add.
Okay. Is that it, Michelle?
Just wanted to check with our hosts. Were there any other questions floating about?
This is Sabrina, the moderator again. That was all the questions we had.
Wow. You guys answered the question that I had lined up for you. You also answered the first three before I even asked them. So thank you for that. Again, I always appreciate being able to share this space with you guys. You guys are the pros in here in this body of work. And again, I lift you up for doing such heavy work. So thank you. Sincerely, thank you.
You know, and in closing, you know, this is one of many issues that any country faces. You know, I work with Michelle on environmental justice issues. Our office is working on a boarding school study on the impacts of boarding schools in Washington State, and so that's something else that's ongoing. Fentanyl and opioids. We'll probably have a tribal opioid response team coming out pretty soon. And so this is one of many issues related to historical trauma. And as we get ready for Native American Month, these are kind of things to consider, you know. You know, there's a lot of good work that we can be proud of, but there's more things that we still need to be resolved. So definitely the work continues. So thank you.
All right. Well, that looks like it's the end of our session. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, guys.
Yes, thank you for having us.